Hello, welcome to Veteran Voice. I'm your host, Larry McCullaugh. Appreciate you tuning in today. We've got a couple of very special guests with us today, World War II veterans who have joined me for today's program. On the left is Dwayne Red Nickell, and I'll just call you Red because that's what everybody knows you as, Red.
That's
Welcome to
right.
the program. Glad you can make it today. And sitting on his left and my right is Bob Hulsey. Bob, thank you for coming out today. We appreciate you making the program. I'm going to start. I usually start by asking y'all when you went into the service, what branch, and so forth. But I want to recognize Red to start with as the 2005 Distinguished Veteran of the Year.
Thank you.
And I know that there were several candidates that were submitted for that, and you stood head and shoulders above the rest. I remember the committee discussing it. Did you know that you had been submitted for that particular honor?
No, that was a complete surprise. I didn't know anything about it until I knew there was something going on when I saw my picture out in the building where they had the.
What did they tell you was going on that day to get you out there?
I thought we were honoring my son's secretary.
Oh.
She's completed, I think, about 75 years of working as secretary for him, and Betty.
Yeah.
And I thought it was all to honor her until I saw my picture, and I thought, well, what's my picture doing out here anyway? Then I knew there was something going on.
So it took you by surprise pretty well then, huh?
Oh, it sure did.
Well, I know that there's been several distinguished veterans from the past, and they only get one every year. And certainly after I saw your resume and heard about what you had been through and then got to meet you at the ceremony, I was very impressed. And it was our honor to honor you that way. And your family was very supportive, helping keeping it a secret from you and stuff. And
they sure were.
You got to be the Grand Marshal in the Veterans Day Parade, and we had some decent weather, as I remember last year. So
yeah, that was a lot of fun.
Well, congratulations again, and I appreciate you coming out and joining us today.
I had been to one previous one, so I knew what they were after it got started. I had been to the one, who's our ex-mayor?
Albert Jones.
Albert.
Yeah.
I had been when Albert was chosen.
You know, Albert's the one that got that parade started again.
Yeah.
Back in, I think this will be the 11th year this year. And he was the one who got the whole thing started. And it's just kind of, it's pretty well standard now where the committee doesn't have to do too much work. We look at the notes from last year, and that seems to work pretty well. Another situation where if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, Red, tell us what branch of the service you went into when you went in and what your training consisted of.
I was in the U.S. Army Infantry, the 106th Golden Line Division, and it was all groundwork. But I was well trained from football at Tillman High School, so I fitted right into the groundwork of it.
Now, where did you take your training at?
Took my training in about 3 different places. One of them was Macon, Georgia, and that led into another story because later on I was in the locker room at the University of Kentucky, and an unhappy player was in there, and he was saying, I wish somebody in here had been to my home in Georgia. And I said, where is it? And he said out loud where it was, and I said, well, here's one here. I went to church while I was down there in a little Baptist church on the corner, and that player was 7'1" Bill Spivey, and he and I became real close friends.
If I met somebody 7'1", I'd want to be my friend too.
Yeah.
So you took your infantry training and then were shipped overseas then, huh?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Well, I came back from there. I went to Camp Hulsey, Texas, and had some training there. And then this camp in outside Indianapolis, had some more training there. So then I left to go to some more training in England. And oddly enough, the training in England is Camp Atterbury in the United States near Indianapolis. And when I got over in England, it was Camp Attisbury. And they had us in Camp Attisbury in England playing tackle football with no pads.
Oh.
They had an ambulance parked by the field, and we needed it.
You guys were hitting pretty hard, huh?
It was a lot of training.
Oh my goodness. Bob, tell us about what branch of the service you went into and what your training consisted of.
Well, I enlisted in the Air Corps on August the 6th, 1940, Scott Field Air Base near Belleville, Illinois. At that time, it was a radio school, and through basic training there, they chose to determine where you were going to go from there, of course, whether you're going to be a mechanic or so forth. But I had taken a lot of course in high school on business and so on and so forth, not much mechanical. So as the war loomed in the clouds, they opened up Jefferson Barracks, Missouri for an induction center. And I went over there to help open it up. And later on they opened up Miami Beach, and I chose not to go to Miami Beach. Then they opened up Atlantic City, and I chose not to go to Atlantic City. Then they opened up a little place in Kearns, Utah, nothing but a desert, and I had to go. And at that time I was the youngest sergeant in the Air Corps, and later on it became the Air Force, of course. But the basic training camps, that time was 3 of them, and I was educating and giving basic training to boys, and all of a sudden I wanted to go overseas, so I volunteered for combat myself, taking a bus from sergeant to private, they told me, and I went to Aerial Gunner School in Las Vegas, Nevada. Then I went to Denver, Colorado to Armor School, and from there I went to Davis Mountain Air Base, Tucson, Arizona, B-24 training. I was a waist gunner on B-24, 10 of us, all single. We took 30 days training at Tucson and went then to Biggsfield, Texas for 30 days. At that time, you had to finish like 90 days to go overseas. Well, my bunch, or the bunch I was in, were all single, all checked out early. We went over in 60 days. And we were what they called a replacement crew. They put 2 crews on a C-54 and flew us to England, or let us land, refuel, give us new orders, and flew us to North Africa to join the 93rd Bomb Group, 409 Squadron, based in North Africa at the time. From there, they picked us up and took us over close to Benghazi, Libya, where we were assigned to an airplane and started bombing with the 8th Air Force down there. Now, the 8th Air Force was stationed in England, but they were on down to Africa just to help out the 12th, I believe, at that time. So we flew down there for a week or two, maybe 2 weeks. Then we went back to England again, cleaned up our airplanes, had a weekend pass. In a few days, we went back down to help some more. So I made 2 trips down there. This was in 43, when I went overseas, early 43. In December the 1st, 1943, I volunteered to go on a crew I didn't know. My tail gunner was behind on 1 raid, and I was behind on one raid, and I wanted to finish with my crew. You had to make 25 raids to come home. But that's the day we got shot down, December the 1st, 1943. 6 men were killed, 4 of us got out.
Well, and you and I were in the same place maybe for a while. I was in Camp Carson, Colorado.
Well, I knew Camp Carson, but I was at Langley Field, I believe, for Armor School.
Well, I always like to ask the World War II vets when they're on here. Now I understand you were already in the military when Pearl Harbor happened. Then,
Yeah, I went in 1940.
Okay, so you were already in. Red, how about you? Were you in when Pearl Harbor? Where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor, and did you suspect anything like that was going to happen?
No, I was still in high school, and 18 of the boys in the senior class were drafted out of high school, and we didn't graduate. Our mothers received our diplomas.
Really?
About 18 of them, And yeah, that was very unusual. I didn't have a prom and anything like that, and all the good times I had.
Your senior trip was one you'll never forget, right?
I missed it all. Mr. Jaton gave us all the same grades we were making about March the 2nd or March 1st. That's the grades we got. If we were happy with it, okay, and if we weren't, it's just tough.
What you got was what you got.
That's what you got.
Now, where were you when you heard about Pearl Harbor, Bob?
It was on a weekend. I was in a little old town called DeSoto, Missouri, when I heard about it. Had a weekend of pass, of course. And of course, I immediately headed back toward Jefferson Parish, Missouri at the time, where I was stationed.
So you knew that you knew that everybody was gonna be going, and
I knew they was going to be shut the gates on us, yes.
Oh yeah, so you better get back there now. Well, Red, tell us where you were deployed when you got there. I know you were at the Battle of the Bulge. I don't remember seeing that from your Veteran of the Year papers. And tell us about when you got to Europe and where you were, and what led up to the Battle of the Bulge. A little bit about that.
Well, when we got over in France, we landed across the channel and went to Normandy, and then they took us by truck, and without any other to do, we were stuck on the front lines, a young outfit, and that's why Hitler hit our particular group, because he knew we were all green and fresh from the United States. That was where it all started. I rode all across France in the back end of a truck, and they wouldn't even let us out of the truck. I asked permission from the driver knocking on the back window if I could go to the bathroom, and he said, no, you just have to go right there in the truck. So we did.
They weren't stopping for anything, huh?
They didn't stop for anything. We were in a rush to get there. So, you know, when the Battle of the Bulge started, it was really a powerful thing, and there were there were barrages coming in every 15 seconds. And again, I was warned that it was getting ready to come in, and I needed to vacate the foxhole where I was immediately. In fact, they said, you got 3 minutes to get out of here, or you're going to be dead. And then they were right. About 3 minutes later, the military barrages started coming in, and they didn't let up for at least 2 days. And quite a bit of the boys that didn't make it through that one either. And
so they were raining shells down on you pretty hard, huh?
oh, they were.
It must have been a terrible experience. Well, now, Bob, I know that you ended up getting shot down. How many missions had you flown when you ended up getting shot down and taken prisoner of war?
Best I recall, I had 10 or 12, something like that in. I don't know exactly how many. You had to make 25. If you made 25, they allowed you to come back home. But if you made 5 at that time, you was lucky. The average was 5.
Now, were you bombing over Germany, or?
We was in England, stationed Hardwick, right above Norwich, in 93rd Bomb Group, 409th Squadron. And we were bombing Germany, France, Norway. We could stay in the hour as high as 14 hours, or it would be 24 if we put tanks in the front bomb bays. But we did make 2 trips to North Africa to help out the 9th or 12th there at that time, help them, because they didn't have too many planes down there. Not too many people recall, but on August the 1st, 1943, our group and the North Africa group made a low-level raid on Palessi oil fields, where they all went in like 400 or 500 feet. They had 178 planes and lost 70 some on the bomb run. And some of them landed in Turkey. I think the mission at that time was like 14 and a half hours in the air, if I'm not mistaken.
Now, what was your normal bombing altitude? You said the low level's 400 or 500 feet. That's not very high.
Well, we bombed like 18 to 20, 22,000. And you know, the channel's only about 26 miles wide. So if you're in England and you start getting off the ground, as soon as you got up 8 or 10, 12,000 feet, the Germans could pick you up on radar or whatever they had. And we'd go to altitude 18, 19, 20,000 before we started across the channel. And on missions of that kind, you could see a fighter, ME-109, come off the ground and attack you and see the markings on it. And the time you went to the target and got back, he'd go down and refuel and get you on the way back if you survived, you know.
My gosh.
And we didn't have any fighter protection at that time.
So when you went to bomb, you were pretty much on your own, just with the gunners that you had on board?
No, we flew. Yeah, we flew formations, stacked formation, 3 planes to a stack in elevations, like 3 here, 3 here, 3 here, and 3 over here. And they had groups of like maybe 100, 150 planes at that time. I don't know how many we had. There wasn't too many heavy bombers in 1943. Later in the war, they put up 1,200, I understand. Numbers is hard for me to remember.
Well, it's been a long time.
So we didn't make any single raids as a per plane. We were all flying daylight formation. Now the English flew night raids, single missions. But we flew daylight bombing.
So you were easy enough to see up there. A lot of flak, I would imagine.
Yes, sometimes the flak was so black you could walk on them out there, just busting in the air.
My goodness.
Oh, wow.
Now the red. I always ask fellows if they've got any particular experience, good or bad, funny, that we can use on TV, of course, that you had. Is there anything that stands out in your mind as far as experiences you had that were either exceptionally good or exceptionally bad?
Well, I've quite a few, really. I thought it was unusual that at the time we got in there, all of us really, the Germans had invented the buzz bomb. That's what we called it. Is that what y'all call it?
Yeah, buzz bombs, yeah.
Yeah, and they would come over, you could hear them coming over above you when you're on the ground, and you'd hear them cut off in the air. Then you could start counting, and you could count how far away they were, They knew the Belgian people knew how to tell where they were. And immediately when those things would come over and drop those bombs, which weren't very accurate at that time, thank heaven, the Belgian people that you'd be staying with would head for the basements. And the whole house would be vacant in less than a minute.
So
they got out of there. And we learned to do that later, but it never did frighten us that way, because we knew they were very inaccurate. So we didn't run for it. We just let them go.
You might run into it if you took off.
Yeah, boy.
So they were just kind of an area. They just get into the general vicinity, and that's when it would cut off and come down.
That's right. They just hit the general vicinity, so you didn't have much to fear for the things. But if a little bit later on, and that would have been rough, real rough.
But the artillery and stuff was fairly accurate, I presume.
Yes, it was.
So that's why the Battle of the Bulge turned into what it was. I know you were taken prisoner of war. You mentioned that. Now you were in what ended up being a very famous prisoner of war camp.
Yeah, it was Stalag 17 near Krems, Austria, and the movie Stalag 17 was based on our camp and the TV program Hogan Heroes.
Now, I remember watching Hogan's Heroes, when I was younger and all. Did it bother you that they made such a comedy out of something like that, or did it upset you that? Because I'm sure it wasn't as the fun and games that they showed on Hogan's Heroes. I mean, it was good entertainment, and I enjoyed it. But I always wondered if the fellows who were actually in that camp resented the fact that they made it look like it was just fun, and that we were always outsmarting the Germans and joking around about it.
Well, the movie itself and Hogan's Heroes were pretty well identical what the camp was like.
Really?
They added a little bit to it and took a little bit away from it. But for example, there's always a sense of humor among American boys. You always find somebody can do anything. If you ask enough guys, you'll find somebody. But in one barracks we had there, they had a subfloor. They took the subfloor up, burned it for heat, put the top floor back down. The Germans there didn't know it. They couldn't figure out where to get the wood coming out of the fireplace, We had no heat. But they would take some small boy that was in a ball turret and had roll call. They'd stick him in front or under somebody's coat or something, roll call, and mess up their count, and they'd just put him in and take him out, put him in and take him out. So there's a lot of humor in the camp to start with.
So you really were pulling like little stunts on the Germans and stuff then.
And one time they took us to delousing where they cut your hair and give you a bath and this and that. Maybe I think we had one about every 6 months or something like that. But the guys got a chance to get some margarine or something. They stuck it, rolled it in their hair. So when they put the clippers up, they couldn't cut it off, things like that.
So I know that under the Geneva Convention, they're not supposed to have you doing any type of labor or forced labor or anything like that. How did you occupy your time while you were in prisoner work?
They didn't allow us to work at all. They knew that we could escape, because every mission that the Air Force made. They gave you an escape route, how to get out, where to meet people. So every time a new man came in camp, he would tell everybody, if you can get out, here's what you need to do. So they wouldn't let us get out and work at all. We didn't have nothing to do outside.
Well, I read during the Battle of the Bulge, I know that there was a lot of close contact then. Was there any time that you ever thought that it ever crossed your mind you might be taken prisoner or something like that might happen to you?
Yes, I got lost between the lines once, and I was lost for about a day, and I followed Jeep tracks, and luckily I followed them in the right direction through the snow, and it got me back to where I had left from, and I had been gone for about a day and a half. And when I walked back into the camp, the boys all said, "Well, there's Red. We thought you were dead." And they sort of made a harmony out of it. "There's Red. We thought you were dead." And I said, "No, I'm back and I'm okay." So there was some celebrating that went on then. And they said, "Well, did you know that when you came back, this road that you just came down, you've been on it for a while, haven't you?" And I said, "Yes, for about 4 or 5 blocks, up to a mile." And they said, "Well, you just walked through a minefield."
Oh, man.
But I was lucky.
Had no idea. You just
No.
happened to get lucky and not step on something. Now, were they anti-personnel mines, do you know, or tank mines, or?
They're just ones you step on and you're gone. My dad during that time had gotten a postcard from the Army, and it said that your son is missing in action. One of them did, and that scared him enough. And then he got another one. He said about 2 days later, and it said your son has been accounted for, and he's okay, nothing serious.
So they had actually told your family that you were missing in action,
Yes, they
because
had.
they didn't know your whereabouts.
That was enough when they told me I was missing in action. That did it to them for a while.
My goodness, that's crazy. Was it when you got lost that time? Was there any other buddy with you? Were you just by yourself? You separated from the rest of the platoon or whatever?
No, I knew I had to do something, so I ran into some more American boys. No, they weren't American, they were British. And I just told them, I said, "Hey, you guys, I'm joining up until I find out where I belong." So I just started following along with these British guys. And I didn't think they could fight too well, really. I guess they thought the same thing about me, I'm sure. But anyway, what turned me off on them was that during the night, we had been trained not to ever start a fire anywhere or use a flashlight or anything, so that the artillery couldn't zero in on that flame. And they didn't pay any attention to that. They were making tea. No kidding, they were making tea.
I've heard that those British have got to have their tea.
They had to have their tea, and they were making tea, and they built them a fire to heat their snow. They melted the snow and got the water in a helmet and made tea.
Stop the battle, it's tea time.
Stop the battle, it's tea time.
I've heard that, man. That's wild. Well, now, Red talked about how his family had been notified that at one point he was missing. Did they notify your family right away that you'd been taken prisoner, or were you listed as missing for a period of time, or how did that work when you were taken prisoner?
Well, I don't remember exactly, but I think that somebody called my mother and heard on a shortwave radio somewhere that I'd been taken to prison. At that time, she didn't know, I don't think. But later on, my father, because he worked for the railroad, and my sister worked in the railroad office, and all the telegrams came through the railroad office. So when the government wired, they just sent a telegram through, and of course they got the telegram at the railroad office, and my sister brought it home to my mother and dad then.
So they didn't know that at that time that you were even shot down. They were just notified eventually that you were taken a prisoner.
They were notified I'd been shot down, but they didn't know what happened to me at the time. And I don't recall how many days it was before they found out I was a prisoner. I think maybe 30, 40 days. I just don't know. Don't remember.
I know that's something that a lot of people are recognizing now more and more with the conflict that we're in, was the families back home and what they had to deal with while their loved ones are overseas. And that's something when I was in Vietnam, I never really thought that much about. I mean, I missed my family, but I really never thought about what they were going through. And when I got back, I found out my father had some, he was watching the news every night, and every time he'd hear about something happening in Quang Tri, he'd get very anxious about knowing what was going on. And that's something that we're realizing now. Of course, you all had, your communications was very limited as far as just getting mail and stuff, whereas now they got emails and cell phones and all the communication. How was your mail service? Was it, especially when you're out in the field, did you get mail very often, or?
Hardly ever.
Hardly ever?
Just
So.
didn't get it. That would really be something to know how cell phones would work in a war, wouldn't it?
Yes.
I don't know.
Who'd ever thought back then that they'd be able to talk to somebody on a telephone?
Yeah.
That's something you just wouldn't even think
I
of.
just can't understand how it would work.
Now, did you get regular mail while you were in the prisoner of war camp?
Well, it wasn't regular, but we got some. We were allowed to write letters home and cards, and of course my mother saved them, and my wife, who was my girl at that time, I saved them, and I still have them home in my folders and so forth. They blanked a lot of it out with black pens so you couldn't read them, but I still have quite a few of them.
Now, did they blank out stuff that you were writing home? And
Yeah,
did
right.
They,
Anything I wrote home, they didn't want to, they'd blank it out.
Okay, how about the things that you were receiving? Did they?
They didn't blank
they-
much of that out. No.
They pretty much let that come through? So you were able to have some communication?
Right.
How long did you say you were in the camp?
A year and 5 months.
A year and 5 months. And right up to the end of the war, I would imagine, is when you were rescued?
Well, we were, like I say, in a camp near the ends near Vienna, and when the Russians got close to us, they moved us out in groups of 500, April the 16th of 1945, marching west, and we got 225 miles in 16 days, I believe, and which is very hard for us to do.
225 miles in 16
but
days
they,
marching?
Walking.
Walking? Wow.
We got through Braunau, Hitler's birthplace, and passed through there and got near the Enns River, and Patton was on the other side, I guess, and we couldn't go any further. So they sent a patrol over one night and found out we was there, and he sent word back he'd come get us the next day. So next day he came and got us, which was May the 3rd, 1945.
So that's when it was getting near the end, and
It was near the end, yeah.
you could tell that after the invasion, or after Normandy, or the D-Day, that things were finally maybe going to happen.
We knew basically when D-Day happened, because all the aircraft on the Russian front and the other fronts all turned and went to the western side. They had to send everything they had out there to stop the Americans until they were sending everything they had there, see. But basically, we knew right away what was happening.
Well, fellas, I'll tell you, this first half hour, as it always does when I'm listening to you guys relate your stories to me, is just gone. And if you got the time, I'd like for you to stick around for another segment if you could, and we'll do another 30 minutes. Let the folks at home let the dog out or the cat in or go to the restroom, whatever they've got to do. So we're going to take a little break now and let Channel 2 take care of some business here, and we'll see you in just a couple of minutes. Welcome back. We're going to continue talking to our World War II vets that we've got with us today. Red, you were getting ready to relate a story to me as we were off taking a break there, and I wanted you to save it so that we could share it with the viewers at home. Go ahead and fill us in on what you were talking about.
Okay, I got trapped in a corn bin by a German tank, and I couldn't get out of there. I thought it was real funny because the tank sat there all night and part of the next day, and it had the motor. They kept the motors running, and it was rough getting out of there. And I got over it then in a foxhole and stayed in there for another day, and my boots froze to my legs and feet, so I had to have some help to get out of that foxhole because I couldn't move my legs. So they came up, and the American boys heard me yelling, and they started pulling me out of there. And when they did, they left my pants. My pants were frozen to my legs, and they had locked on. So they just pulled me right out of there, and it was sort of embarrassing.
As if it wasn't cold enough, now they got your pants off of it.
Yeah. It really got cold then.
Well, if your boots, I understand they had to cut your boots off your feet.
Yeah, a lot of ice, and snow. They had the coldest winter they'd had in 100 years, and the temperature was 40 below zero. And in places, you would walk in the snow, you would go completely under the snow, because it was, heaped up on the sides of the road. So you would momentarily disappear into that. And it was really something to get through it.
I suppose your feet were frostbitten by the time you were pulled out of the hole then?
Yeah, I had serious frostbite of both feet, hands, and, legs all along the whole body. And to get any water to drink, the Germans had poisoned the water around, that you could get to, so there wasn't any water. And to get a drink, you had to get some snow in your helmet, in your steel helmet, and build a fire in the daytime, not at night. Build a fire and melt the snow to get you a drink of water, any water that you wanted to use for anything. So that certainly wasn't healthy for you, drinking that snow water, I heard later, but we did it.
So at that time, it was just a matter of self-preservation.
Self-preservation.
You didn't have anything to, you didn't have a nice camp to go back to at that time. You were just, whatever the elements were is what you had to live in.
You had to live in it, and it was something to live in, too. I thought the strangest thing that I learned in the foxhole was that how to keep warm. And some of the old pros taught me quickly to, they said, go get you some gasoline. I said, well, how do you get gasoline anyway? What do you do? And they said, you just find an abandoned vehicle of any kind and use your bayonet and stick a hole in it and get your gas in your sea ration can. And then you take your sea ration can full of gasoline to the bottom of your foxhole. You cover your foxhole with your blanket partly, but you don't cover it too tightly. You leave an opening for the smoke to get through, the vapors and all. And you keep that gasoline, you drop a match on it. I said, well, gasoline will explode if you do that. And they said, no, it won't. It'll burn right in the top of that can. Just don't ever shake the can too much. So I would light the top of the can in the heat from the burning gasoline would give a little bit of warmth. It was very precious, but it would give enough warmth to keep you from freezing to death. So I learned you could do gasoline like that, and I don't believe it today. In fact, I believe I'd be a little bit scared to try it.
Yeah, we don't recommend the viewers, don't be going out in the backyard saying, hey, I think I'm going to drop some gas. The fire department wouldn't appreciate that, I don't think. Well, Bob, you were telling me a story a while ago about a picture. And if you don't mind, I'd like you to share that with the viewers. I think that was really interesting.
Well, always at briefing before a mission, they would tell you not to take anything with you except your dog tags. And one trip I got shot down on, I decided to take my girlfriend's picture with me, and I stuck it in my pocket. And of course I got shot down. And when they took me before a well-educated Luftwaffe pilot, young man, about my age, to tell you the truth, he found this picture, and he wondered who it was and what all about it. And I told him, I said, well, if I get back to the United States, I guess I'll try to marry her. And he said, well, if I had a girl waiting for me like that, I'd just like to keep the picture. And he turned it over and stamped the back of it, give it back to me. And from there on, I got to keep the picture. Every time the Germans get a hold of me, I'd show them that picture, and they'd give it back to me. Otherwise, they would confiscate it. And my wife still has the picture today. I brought it back home, and she has it in her purse now.
I think they're going to be showing that on the screen. I think the people have got that. That's really amazing. Were there very many other fellows that were allowed that had pictures?
I don't know. I mean, it's been so long. There's so many stories told about the boys in that camp. It's just there's not enough paper in the United States to write all the stories they've tell. And I think they're all true.
Did that help to kind of inspire you and give you hope and stuff, that picture, to be able to look at it?
Well, you couldn't give up in there. You had to have some degree of hope along the line, you know.
Now, how was your treatment in the camp? I know we talked about how you were always trying to pull something over on the Germans.
Well, the treatment wasn't very bad. It was a food situation. They didn't have anything to feed us with, to tell you the truth. We'd have 21 meals and 17 of them be hot water, you know. Or they have a loaf of bread to 17 men, and they fed us what we call rutabaga soup. If they had any rutabaga, that's like a turnip. They didn't wash them. They put them in a big old tub of some kind. But no, they didn't particularly beat on us or anything. But some of us got mistreated when we were picked up originally because the civilians got them or the ground troops got them or something like that. But we were pretty well controlled by the Air Force, Luftwaffe over there. And
who captured you? Was it civilians that captured you, or was it a German patrol? Or
I'll tell you the truth, I don't remember who got me, but my tail gunner and I taught my tail gunner into going with me that day. That new crew we didn't know. He liked the mission also, so we both got shot down together. And after we hit the ground and it was snowing and cold, and I didn't see the ground I hit it, we jumped pretty close together, and I heard dogs barking. And so I grabbed my chute up and started across this field, and I seen a kind of a haystack. So I went to the haystack to bury my chute, and about the time I started burying it, I heard somebody on the other side. And of course, we were Yellow May West, in case you got shot down and jumped in the channel, you know. And I looked around, and here's a guy digging a hole with a Yellow May West. So I knew he was an American. And I said, hey, boy, what are you doing? It was my tail gunner. He like to died. So we buried our chutes and so forth, and then we took off walking. We shot down about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and this is about 4 in the afternoon, I guess. And we walked on a country road, and we met people, and they met us. And I lost my shoes, and had my flying suit on, but they didn't pay attention to me, and I didn't pay attention to them. But it got awful cold, so we went into a little church. It was about kind of like Kev or something, you know, because I didn't think they went to church over there. And went down to get warm, and we lay down in the pew far in the church, and a few minutes I heard the front door open, and I looked up, and here's this elderly lady. She looked here, and she looked right. Finally, I just stood up. I knew I had it. She couldn't speak English, and I couldn't speak German, and he couldn't speak German. So she motioned us to follow her. So we followed her out, and she took us home. This was about dusk, close to dark. Put us down in the big basement cellar. And we hadn't been there for long, and that door busted open. There stood the Gestapo, black suits, and gun like that, barrel hat bigger than a cannon. Somebody had seen her pick us up and take us in there, and they come after us. And lucky me, they thought we were English, but I had taken a pocket knife I'd kept in my pocket, which we were allowed to do, and I'd cut a piece off my chute, and it had the chute number and the U.S. Air Force on the chute, my parachute. And once they seen that, they knew we were Americans at the time. Because I lost my shoes, my hat, my cap, everything I had except one. So they took us in over to some building of some kind, and the Air Force boys come and got us, and later on it was Frankfurt and interrogation and on down the line. But it was about a week or so before I got in the POW camp for the time they got me. And you heard about the Jewish people, the box cars, or that's the kind of cars we traveled in. And they locked us in there for, I think it was 6 or 7 days. and all we could just peek out small holes. And as we went through the railroad yards, they had air raids going. The Germans all leave us in the box cars, while they had air raids. But fortunately, I made it and got back home.
Well, everyone's glad you made it home, I'm sure. Probably a lot of fellows that didn't make it. You didn't have much food. What y'all had you had C rats or K rations, or what'd you have?
We had a whole lot of C rations. I guess the C stands for can, because that's what they were in. And they were layered. The top layer was cheese, always a big blob of thick cheese. And it was good, but it got sort of old after you eat it for a while.
So you never saw any kind of C rations or anything like that when you were in captivity, or?
We didn't have C rations, but we did have some what they call Red Cross parcels. They would come in, and the Germans would take a bayonet and punch every can a hole until you couldn't save it and escape with it, of course. And there was a little bit of coffee in there, a little bit of powdered milk. We didn't get too many, but we did get some through.
So that was provided by the Red Cross?
By the Red Cross, yes.
Did they come and do inspections or anything to see how you were being treated or anything like that?
Never, no. I don't think they were allowed in.
So when you were at the Battle of the Bulge, you had C rations? I presume you ran out eventually, or did y'all pretty well stocked up?
They were really stocked up because that's all we ate for quite a while, was C ration, and I won't forget that big piece of cheese in there. Then they had another layer in there that was candy, and it was a layer you wanted to get to, But that was about it on those C rations. They got old fast.
So you just kind of got to eat out of the can, or what? They just eat whenever you got the chance, I would guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Now you were mentioning a while ago about the difference between the troops, the Americans versus the German troops. Something that you had noticed about them.
Well, from what I observed, most American boys, you could take 4, 5, 6, or 10 of them. If the leader gets disabled or can't lead, somebody will take his place automatically. German troops, what I could see, if the leader, something happened to them, they just kind of stood around all the time, the ones I come in contact with. So the big difference between the way the ground troops operated in Germany and ours did.
Do you think that probably had an influence on the way the war came out as after the invasion there on D-Day, that when the battles were going on, if a German officer or the NCO in charge was wounded, the troops just really didn't know what to do?
I don't know. I just think it's a big difference in command, who was willing and able to take over if something happened, an emergency.
Well, that was the
And this was true in any group, not just ground troops.
I think that's the thing that we all experienced in the military, was the camaraderie of taking care of each other. I had a guest on one time who said that when you're in combat, you're not fighting for ideals or anything like that. You're fighting for your fellow soldier. You guys are like, the movie Band of Brothers is a good example. That you guys lived together and you counted on each other and relied on each other for your very existence and for your lives. And that when the time came, you guys stood up for each other and did what you had to do.
Yeah, our pilot, we made 2 trips to North Africa, and before we'd go down, they would issue certain items. And the first trip we made down, they issued sleeping bags to the officers. Of course, it was six enlisted men and 4 officers. And our pilot said, no, if they're going to sleep with blankets, we'll take blankets. We don't know sleeping bags. So they slept the same thing we did. Of course, in the desert, it was cool at night in the Libyan desert down there. But basically, that's what I observed between the American boys and the German boys. And
Okay.
I've seen quite a few of the guards in the camp act the same way, between themselves.
Well, I understand that you guys got something else in common too. That both of you had kind of got an encounter with General Patton and kind of came to the rescue for you fellows. I mean, I know that a lot of people have seen the movie, outstanding movie. It was, as a matter of fact, I saw it for the first time, I think, when I was in basic training down at Fort Knox. I had just gone into the military in '70. And tell us about how Patton came across you. How that happened?
Well, Patton, we couldn't move our tanks in that snow, And Patton couldn't move his either for a while, but he made a special prayer to God that he wanted the weather to be changed, and he wanted it right now so that he could get those tanks back up there to rescue us. And it happened. And it was quite a story on the front lines there about him getting those tanks up there. And I've forgotten how far he came in about 1 or 2 nights. They didn't expect him to do it. And he of course, his troops, they hurt from going that far, that fast. But he got there in time to rescue it. He's got his weather from God, and it changed the face of the war quickly, rescuing him.
It's amazing how one thing like that, I remember in the movie, he had instructed his chaplain to come up with a special prayer for the weather.
And I was over there, again, and when he prayed for that, he prayed so the Air Force could get over. And I don't know whether any of your buddies have told about the number of airplanes that were in the sky that day they rescued us or not. But I'm telling you, the sky was completely covered.
Somebody said 2,500 or something like that in the air that day.
It was amazing. It looked like a cloud coming in, and instead it was just a bunch of airplanes, a big bunch.
And I bet you were glad to see it.
Oh man, we shouted at them. We went out and just waved at them, and we took a risk of being shot just to wave at them.
You didn't know what was coming up. Things were pretty hairy there, weren't they?
That really was a rescue.
Well, and now you say that you went in a short period of time over 200 miles, and then you ran into Patton's unit. Is that what happened?
Yeah, we marched about 225 miles in 16 days west, and of course Patton was moving east, and we got to the Enns River, which we had to cross if we was going any further, and Patton had to be on the other side. How far from the Enns, I don't know, but he sent a patrol over the river to find what's going on the other side. Of course, the patrol found us in the woods over there. We had about 4 guards to every 500 men guarding us, and they got through the guards, no problem at all. And as soon as they radioed back what we found, he said, "Well, I'll come get you tomorrow morning." So they came across and got us.
And then once they did get to you, did they just kind of set up an area
there?
They
didn't have time to mess with us. They were moving too fast. They left officers in charge to get us straightened out and get us on our way back to some safe camp or something, and on our way back to the United States then. He just left people in charge to take care of us.
So he was coming through.
Yeah, he was moving. It looked to me like those boys had been on the move for several days, because none of them hadn't shaved, and they looked tough, and they were tough. They didn't ask any questions. They were moving. They had to move.
And that's where the leadership came in. I know that the Germans were well aware of Patton, and I think that was part of the strategy they used to make D-Day successful. Is they thought, well, wherever Patton is, that's where the action's got to be. And according to the movie, he didn't like the fact that he was being used as a, kind of a decoy.
Yeah, they just throwed off guns and ammunition to us and food and so forth that we needed, and just kept on moving. They didn't hang around.
I understand you went back and got we showed it on the air a while ago, the picture of you when you were taken prisoner.
Yeah, we were close to a big aluminum factory, and the Germans had carried all the records and the routes to the camp along with the march, and they had headquarters at the aluminum factory. And a bunch of guys went up to the aluminum factory and found all these records, and we got them and brought them back home. And of course, that's where I got my picture. When they found my file, a guy knew it and gave it back to me. But yeah, we brought all the records home and still have them.
I'll bet that's really something to have something that old and to remind you of that. And we were talking before the program began about the associations that you're a member of and the reunions that you have every year. Tell the viewers a little bit about that.
Yeah, there's 3 associations in the United States. One's American ex-POWs. Another was the American ex-POW Foundation, which is a foundation to generate money to finance the American ex-POWs, which is a nonprofit organization. And of course, there was about 178,000 prisoners in World War II in Vietnam and Korea. altogether. But anyway, they being a nonprofit, they can't generate enough money to sustain it. But they've died off to the point there's only about 15,000 left POWs. The foundation uses our name for that purpose to generate money. Then there's a Stalag 17B, which I belong to, which is independent of the other two, and we're Stalag 17B ex-POWs in America. If the other two organizations deteriorate and go down because people are passing away, we will eventually do the same thing, because veterans are dying like 1,500 a day. And during World War II, there was about 12 to 15,000 in the service. 5 years ago, there's only 5 million left. Well, if you're dying at 1,500 a day, and the older we get, and I'm 84, and this gentleman's 84, 85, the older we get, the more is dying. The amount gets greater. You know, 3 or 4 years, and we'll be all gone. That's 5 million won't last very long at that rate. So, based on my camp, there's about 800 of us left. And we meet every year, the first week in May, and been doing it for almost 40 years. Last year we met in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Next year we're going to Tucson. But at our age, with the cost of traveling and the ability for us to travel, is getting real tough on us. But years ago, we had a group that could control the vote at the National. My Stalag 17B had enough guys attending that election, we could control the votes, but we're not that strong anymore. But like I say, the way people are passing away, 4 or 5 years, there won't be any American ex-POWs, be Vietnam, Korean boys, Iraq, but it won't be no more World War II.
I think it's really great that you fellows can get together and relive those experiences and put your power together the way you do. Now, since you were in at 40 and you came out of high school, it's like you said, you were probably a little bit younger than Bob is there, aren't you? Well, do you mind telling me, mind my asking?
I'm 80.
Are you? Okay.
He went to Jetton High School on Old 10th Street, didn't you?
Yeah.
Well,
When they drafted us out, all of the group I was with, all of them are 80 now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're right on it.
Well, now, do you attend any reunions or anything like that, or I know you probably still associate with some of the fellows that you were in the service with, or are there that many left around, or you got here in Paducah or Western Kentucky?
I never was in the Army with very many Paducah boys, so the reunions, I don't ever hear about them if they have them.
In other words, if they're going on, you're not on the mailing list. Then,
That's right. I think they're just about to run out.
Well, I know both of you are associated with the WW2 DC trip, and I imagine there was quite a bit of camaraderie that was formed on that little trip out to Washington DC. And you understand you fellows still meet on a regular basis out at Ryan's Steakhouse.
That's right.
Yeah, and how many people do you have usually attend those? Yeah, just rough, shot in the dark guess.
I believe Sandy said there were 101.
Really?
So that's pretty good.
Oh yeah. She says you fellows have a pretty good time out there too.
Sure do.
Well, I think it's great. That's something that people who have not been in the military, I don't think, understand the camaraderie of just somebody that you know, even if you weren't in the service with them. I only knew of one particular fellow that was from Lone Oak when I was in Vietnam, and at that time I lived in Muncie, Indiana, so I didn't know until I moved down here and started getting active, and we put up the names of the guys that died in Vietnam, and I recognized that name and found out that I knew this fellow who was from Paducah, and kind of small world after all type of thing. We're getting near the end there, fellas. Is there anything any stories that you haven't touched on that you'd like to relate to the viewers before we run out of time here? Bob, you got anything?
Well, I don't know. You hear about funny things. When I went overseas, I was making about $150 a month, I guess. I had a $100 allotment going to my mother, and I had flying pay, which was half pay. But anyway, I bought 100 cartons of cigarettes. I smoked at the time. And when I got to England, they were 5 cents a pack. I'd paid 7 for them in the United States. I thought they'd be shorts, But over there, you had all kinds of money. They had nothing, of course, and Americans were set on a high pedestal over there at that time in '43, and they thought we hung the moon. But we had more money than most of any of them over there, and could buy about anything we wanted. And,
I know there's a lot of things you see in documentaries where it got started with the GIs giving chocolate.
and talk about things happening. We went to North Africa, and the water down there was terrible. They gave us, they had what they called salt something in it, you know, and you couldn't get it down. So we'd steal the water out of life rafts to drink. And then if we ever got shot down the Mediterranean Sea, we'd have any water, of course. Yeah, there's lots of things.
But at the time, you just wanted that clean water. Red, is there anything that you want to touch on before we run out of time here?
Oh, I don't. I saw Patton one time when I was over there. He was in a building. We were taking a building, and we just finished taking a building battle. And he was standing on the front porch of a dilapidated, looked like a grocery store or something. And he was flipping raisins up in the air and catching them in his mouth. And I asked the soldiers around me, I said, who is that old boy up there eating raisins like that anyway? And they said, that's General Patton. Oh, I really thought I'd seen something.
So you got a chance to actually see him.
Yeah.
I'll bet that is something else. Well, gentlemen, I really want to thank you for coming on the program today. This hour has gone by quick. And I wanted to point out to you, like I say, my father was in World War II, and it was truly fellows like you that were an inspiration to a lot of us who went to Vietnam, because we were wanting to serve our country as our fathers did. And I'm not going to get off on a rant here or anything, but I do know that the word hero seems to be thrown around a lot now. There's some words that seem to get used all the time, and I certainly feel for the families and the fellows who are dying over in Iraq and Afghanistan, but it seems like everybody who's serving and everybody who gets killed is referred to as a hero. And I think that when you kind of throw that word around, you have a tendency to bring it down a few levels. But I honestly believe both of you, after what you experienced, you in the Battle of the Bulge and you being a prisoner of war, are truly American heroes, not only in what you did there, but the way you continue to serve your country and stay active and serve as good examples to the young people of America today. So I want to thank both of you for coming on today, and I really appreciate and respect you. And maybe we can get together and do this again sometime.
Thank you. I hope so.
All right.
I hope we
Red,
make it.
I hope you do too. And you guys keep meeting out at Ryan's and have a good time. Okay. Now, when do y'all meet out there at Ryan's Steakhouse?
I don't know.
Is it the first Monday or second
Monday?
Second Monday of every month.
I don't know, but I want to give you some good information.
Good.
The Vietnam boys and the Korea boys is the one brought the VA to the front page of the United States. If it hadn't been for them, the World War II boys wouldn't get what they're getting today. Now, I got out of service in '45, had a disability, and they gave it to me and took it away from me because I made too much money. But not until Vietnam came along and the and Korean boys objected to this VA thing, and every guy that's been to service needs to go to VA and get what his benefits they can give you. They're eager to wait on you now, I'll tell you.
Well, good. We're glad that
They're
you got
eager to get you.
Good, and I encourage people to do that.
But you
I want to thank you all for joining in with us today. I didn't mean to cut you off there, Bob. We're going to run into the next program. Thank you. We'll see you next time on Veteran Voice.